Welcome on into the week 3 wide receiver rankings. Already on to week 3 here. It's craziness. So in this video, we will be starting out with going over some of the interesting usage information that I was able to come across from, by and large, stuff that JJ Zachariason had tweeted out in his big information dump after the Sunday set of games. And so after we get done looking at that, we'll look at how I did with my loves and my fades last week. Had a lot of loves. And also, so we'll get that in check this week. I won't have so many this week. Then, of course, we'll get to my rankings. I'll explain to you what you're looking at on the screen in terms of these highlighted columns and what they each mean, even though they're listed, might not exactly mean what you think they mean. So let's start off with some of that interesting usage information. Right after I let you know that if you want to get these rankings, there will be rankings updates throughout the week, and there are a few ways that you can get them. You can always go up on the website, www.theFFForge.com. This is a live sheet that gets updated almost instantaneously anytime I make any changes to it. So it's up there, you can see it, and that's how you get the most recent up-to-date rankings until Sunday morning, which I sometimes make some last-second updates while I'm streaming. For any of your start-sit questions, 3 hours prior to kickoff, I'm here on YouTube, live streaming, answering questions, and it's a good time, so come on and join us and say hello, if nothing else. And then Thursdays prior to kickoff as well, I'm here and doing that as well. Running back video should have already come out. If you're interested in the running backs, you can go check out that video, see what I had to say about a few guys there. So let's get on to the interesting usage stuff here. Jameson Williams of the Detroit Lions with 13 and 14% target shares through the first 2 weeks. Been running a lot of empty routes, though, because he has the most routes run on the team through those 2 weeks as well. So I don't know how much that changes. Doesn't change. He's, being used as a field separator, of course, but we also know that he's very good at that, and he can come through for you in fantasy with that. But that is a little bit inconsistent of a role, and I'm not too shocked by that, and so he might be a little bit frustrating to own, but one of those guys where you have to start him a lot of the time too, depending exactly on the matchup and what your other options are. Keeping in line with part of the reason why I was concerned about Jameson Williams coming into the year was the draft pick of Isaac TeSlaa, who does really, really well in that intermediate area of the field as like the third down, change mover, as well as some guy who can get you some touchdowns, really good red zone threat. And that's what he's been so far in the NFL as well. And from week 1 to 2, his route participation jumped from 7% in week 1 to 29% in week 2. So obviously somebody that they're growing and getting involved at a fast rate here in this offense. Really love his skill set for this team in terms of what they needed. And I think that's part of why you see Jameson Williams maybe not being as varied in the types of routes that he, is running in terms of giving you that floor for fantasy football. So we'll see how that all shakes out in the long term. But for now, just a couple of things on that Detroit wide receiver room. Tillman continues to outscore Jerry Jeudy in fantasy football. Cedric Tillman, that is a Browns wide receiver note there. Devontae Adams of the Los Angeles Rams had a 40.6% target share in week 2. That is dominant. I am a little bit concerned about him. Given the matchup this upcoming week, the ball might not quite find its way to him that much if Quinyon Mitchell's covering him. So we'll get to that in the rankings. See, I'm a little bit low on him. Juwan Jennings versus Ricky Pearsall. Juwan Jennings had 10 targets. Ricky Pearsall had 6 targets. Juwan Jennings, still banged up too. So definitely good for Juwan Jennings' stock. Ricky Pearsall, this was my concern about him, just being a little bit unproven. Was wondering if we were overdrafting him. We'll see. And of course, it didn't help that Brock Purdy goes down and everything. But it also probably helped that George Kittle went down. Chris Olave has over 30% of the target shares so far in the offense for the New Orleans Saints. And it's produced middling, okay, not good, not league-helping stats. And that's what we expected him to be coming into the season. But if that offense can grow, if they can get better, if Rattler, with more time playing, can improve as the season goes along, that's something that, he could become even reliable. But right now, he's just a really nice wide receiver 4 to be able to have on your roster in terms of that floor. and then you just hope when you do play him, you get a touchdown on top of that. There just won't probably be too many of those throughout the season. Marvin Harrison Jr. is living at a 20% target share. That's not good. The elite guys are 30%. The really good, guys are at 25%. 20%, it gets iffy. It gets iffy. So that's not fantastic. Part of the reason why I wasn't super high on him this offseason, wasn't sure how much that might grow or not. We were hoping it would grow. Josh Downs, Indianapolis, he led them in targets here in week 2 despite a low share of routes run. And he might still be coming back from injury. That might be part of the reason why he had a low share of routes run. And we did see that eat into the ultimate targets numbers, at least for Tyler Warren this last week, and that was some of my concern about Tyler Warren. Not that I'm concerned about him right now. He still did fantastic with the opportunities that he had. I don't want to say luckily at this point, because he's just looked really good, and there are going to be great weeks, and tight ends, they're not consistent. So if this is a down week in terms of the targets and catches for him, that's great. I think 4 receptions, but a lot of yards. A.J. Brown's target share was at 38% in week 2, so you love to see that. It did not create fantasy production, but everything starts with opportunity. If you're not getting targeted, you can't produce. You literally cannot produce as a receiver if you don't get a target. So we love to see the targets coming his way. 38% on a Philadelphia offense isn't as many targets as 30, 25% even in some offenses. Just a heads up there. For instance, Chris Olave with his 30% target share in that offense that throws a lot more, that results in, I believe, more targets, or at least roughly the same. Terry McLaurin began last year with a 3.7 fantasy point game and an 8.2 fantasy point game in his first 2 weeks. That's in a full PPR scoring. Don't freak out yet, and I think you're in line for a rebound game this week against Las Vegas. Travis Hunter's route participation and his target share dropped significantly in week 2 from week 1, was used a lot more on defense. This was the concern about drafting him. I don't know what to do with it at this point. I still want a week 3 sample to see what the heck happens there. We did get a heads up at least, and maybe this will continue throughout the season, that the team was going to be using him more on defense in week 2, but maybe, I don't know. I just don't know what to expect there right now, and so he is obviously a rough start. I don't have him all the way dropped down in my rankings, though, yet either. Brian Thomas Jr. has over a 25% target share on the season, so that's livable. He's had a good amount of targets, and that's a team that's been passing quite a bit. Roma Dunze is hovering around a 30% target share, so that's fantastic. DJ Moore is around 16%, and, we already said it's a little bit concerning at 20%, 16%. Really tough to live with, especially when that's typically a lot more shorter stuff, although it's been a little bit of a mixed bag in terms of the types of targets that DJ Moore's been getting. A little bit of this and a little bit of that. Now let's go on to my loves and my fades from week 2. A big love list. I loved Garrett Wilson. I bought in. Why did I buy in on this New York Jets offense? Why did I do it? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. I'm not the only one. But yeah, I was high on them last week for some reason. George Pickens was a love. That went really well. Devonta Smith was a love. I think we saw the increased targets come his way. It just didn't result in anything, unfortunately. Cedric Tillman was a love. I think he had a fine week, right? He did. Yeah, he did things. Rashid Shaheed was a love. He came through for you. And Troy Franklin was my deep love of the week, and the boy came through. Same with Diami Brown from last week and Troy Horton from last week. A couple of my loves from last week that didn't come through last week, or were kind of came through this week. And my fades were Tyreek Hill, and I was a little bit nervous on that all week. Terry McLaurin got that right, and Michael Pittman got that right. So overall, I think a pretty good list of loves and fades there. Nothing, it happens with Garrett Wilson. That's the risk of that offense that I was talking about all offseason in terms of the volatility. Now, let's get on to my first tier of wide receivers. We got 11 guys in this tier. Your must-starts. maybe even studs, but not necessarily all of them producing studly yet throughout the season. Nonetheless, I've got CeeDee Lamb at the top of this list, followed by Nico Collins. I don't know. Jacksonville's defense actually hasn't done terrible, but I think that's been more so just like the matchups and how they've gone. I'm not buying into this being some great defense, but Houston's offensive line is an issue. It was an issue last year, too. Is it worse? I don't know. Does it have room to grow? Yeah, of course. So we'll see on that for Nico Collins, but he came through last week. Had a good week for you. Good enough. Puka Nacua against Philadelphia. Yeah, I'll probably actually move Puka up ahead of Nico Collins. This was a pre-last Monday night game. Amon-Ra St. Brown going up against Baltimore. Also, that's a really nice matchup. We might have to move that up ahead there as well, although Baltimore did much better in week 2 in coverage. Ja'Marr Chase going up against Minnesota, of course. We're just going to be a little less optimistic about Ja'Marr Chase going forward, but Minnesota's secondary can be had, so not the worst week ever. And Jake Browning 2 years ago did good. He's been seasoning on the bench ever since then, learning. He knows this offense very well. I have a certain amount of faith in terms of backup quarterbacks, and that is very much what he is, in Jake Browning, one of the best backup quarterbacks in the league, I would say. Then we've got Malik Neighbors going up against KC, so not the best matchup there, but we'll see how that works out. Justin Jefferson, Nick Foles in at quarterback, but going up against Cincinnati, so there is something to think that he could have a good week. Drake London going up against Carolina, another good matchup. Brian Thomas Jr. going up against Houston, not really a great matchup, actually. Maybe Zay Flowers and Jackson Smith-Njigba should be ahead of Brian Thomas at this point, but nonetheless, you're starting these guys, and there is very little reason that you're not. You got to be in a small league to not start one of these guys and have drafted well. But if you do have a question, amongst that top 11, where you're going to have to sit one of them, feel free to ask me, because I might change my mind on BTJ compared to Zay and Jackson Smith-Njigba. Both of them doing really well. In higher implied point total types of matchups as well. By the way, guys, what are we looking at here? These columns. This first column is fantasy points, but it's not the average fantasy points per week or last week's fantasy points. It is average fantasy points per week with a twist of consistency. These points that you're seeing is a point system that I keep track of, called my equalized value, is what I originally named that charting. And it actually has proven time and time again to be more valuable for wide receivers and running backs at the very least, in terms of predicting future success of them winning you any random week against people that are, are lower on the point system of that scale. So this is just average fantasy points per week. And it's a little bit cherry-picked. If a player gets injured, I might not include that week for them if it's an early injury in the game and they didn't produce yet. If they did produce and it was an early injury, then I'll just count it for them anyways. So a little bit cherry-picked, but once again, that's for good reason. It's to let you know in a full game how should this player produce. So it's a good predictive stat there in terms of how well they've done and, slight prediction. Targets, average targets per game, not receptions, targets. Over here, we've got the spread for a wide receiver if they are expected to be in a positive game script or a negative, spread here, expected to be the dominant team to win the matchup by a lot. The more that it's expected to be a positive game script, the more that it's expected that the running backs get opportunities and there's fewer opportunities in the receiving game. So that's what that's telling you. And the implied point total is just, the implied points that this team is going to have. So, of course, points are good for every position in fantasy football. So that's why you'd see this higher number being green over here, especially for Zay Flowers this week. High chance at him getting a touchdown, a lot of work here against Detroit in what should be a shootout there. So my second tier, as I was getting to, is a little bit larger here. The cutoff was Ladd McConkey, a little bit of a down week, but you can see, he's been doing fine for the targets that he's gotten. Hopefully that will increase. Going against Denver this week, so there is going to be some concern about Patrick Surtain, but I'm going to guess, given how well the other receivers have done, that it's going to be not a shadowing game. I'm going to guess Patrick Surtain's going to cover, there will be some sort of other game plan that won't exactly be a shadow. Not that that's a guarantee, but it's also not a guarantee that the shadow would be on Ladd McConkey. They could have him, Quinyon Mitchell. They were afraid of that. They don't want to allow the explosive play, and they want to keep everything more underneath them, or something like that could also be the game plan. So we don't know what the game plan will be. I would say it's not a guarantee that Patrick Surtain covers Ladd McConkey, though. A.J. Brown here, at least the targets were back. I've had him in the past. This is what happens for stretches with A.J. Brown, and it sucks, but usually so far, he's always won you more games than he's lost you. So keep the faith. You don't want to miss out on a big A.J. Brown game. In a game against Los Angeles Rams where, it could be a game where they actually need this passing game a little bit more. That's quite possible. Courtland Sutton here as my wide receiver 14 on the week, followed by Garrett Wilson. They're going up against Tampa Bay. We're going to give this a little bit of faith. However, this might have to go lower because Justin Fields, it looks like he's probably going to miss the game, to be honest. So leaning that way, but I haven't ranked him that way yet. If Justin Fields is not playing, I don't remember, is it Tyrod Taylor? So he's serviceable if it's Tyrod Taylor, if that's right. So we'll see, but probably would be a little bit lower on Garrett Wilson than this in that situation. George Pickens at wide receiver 16, followed by Tyrone McMillan. Rome Odunze, hell yeah, let's go. That is a off-season victory at this point for me. It took me a little while to buy into it, but then I bought into it full steam later on in the full off-season. Terry McLaurin is a love of mine this week going up against Las Vegas. I think this is the week. The implied point totals there is nice for him. The game flow isn't necessarily, but remember, they've got to get to a point where they're leading, and a lot of times that can happen through the receiving attack. So that's what I'm hoping for this week. I think Terry McLaurin could be in line for a big week. We just saw a big explosive from Quentin Johnston last week against Las Vegas. Devonta Smith, I'm going to give it some faith again here, assuming Dallas Goedert's not playing. If Dallas Goedert is in this week, I will probably lower my expectation here again, but for now, I'm going to keep the faith on Devonta Smith. That might be a mistake, and DK Metcalf is another love for me here at wide receiver 21, going against New England. That's why he is a love. That secondary has definitely struggled, has some injuries there, not the greatest, even if it's healthy, but definitely in the secondary. Better when it's healthy. I don't think that they're going to get Christian Gonzalez back this week yet. We'll see. I would maybe not make him a love in that situation, but I think this is one of those weeks where you can feel pretty good about playing DK Metcalf. Devontae Adams have right behind that as a fade at my wide receiver 22, so you can see I am lower on him than a lot of people this week. Could end up being a mistake, as we noted. He had, a 40.6% target share in week 2. Obviously, that connection is there between him and Stafford, but Quinyon Mitchell, one of the better shutdown cornerbacks in the league, is, I think, not that I always get this right, going to be shadowing Devontae Adams. To me, that would make the most sense, especially given the fact that they had him on George Pickens a lot in week 1. And so I think this is a week where the ball might be finding Puka Nacua at a really, really high rate. This could be one of those 18 target games for Puka, and maybe Adams is more at 7, and you're really relying on a big game and a big gain on one of those and or a touchdown. So I don't hate Devontae Adams, but I'm nervous about him. So he is going to be a fade for me this week. Obviously nervous about T. Higgins, but I am optimistic since they're going up against Minnesota. Not the best secondary group in the world. They can be had. So, I think he is somebody you could sit, but you don't have to this week. I don't know. Mike Evans going up against New York Jets. It's it's a solid secondary. It's not a bad matchup here. I should maybe have Mike Evans even ahead of T. Higgins. I don't know. There is some good cornerbacks there for the New York Jets. Let's get on to this next tier, starting off at my wide receiver 25, going to my wide receiver 35. So if there's any tier, by the way, where I might mix things up the most, is probably this tier, going from Courtland Sutton down to essentially Mike Evans, but at least down to even Adams, even though I'm fading him, but for sure down to DK Metcalf. You could just turn that group pretty much upside down, and I wouldn't argue with it at all either. So just a heads up there, this is the group where I think there's the most potential for like disappointment at the top and better outcomes from the bottom of this tier against those other guys at the top of that tier. So now back to this tier. We've got, starting off with our wide receiver 1 being Marvin Harrison Jr., my wide receiver 25. Marvin Harrison Jr., followed by Tyreek Hill, Jameson Williams, Jacoby Myers, Marquise Brown, going up against the New York Giants. I don't know, should I be holding on to that faith? You can see, because of week 1, the targets are still there for him, and why couldn't that repeat against the New York Giants, Juwan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, Chris Olave, Keon Coleman, maybe a little high on him this week, but going up against Miami, I really love when people are going up against Miami. Keenan Allen and Emeka Egbuka. Not fading or loving Emeka Egbuka. We'll get to that. I know I'm low on him again, but when you look at overproducers, he's the biggest overproducer out of the top 10 or so, whatever they are so far on the season, top 10 guys as wide receivers. I assume he's still a top 10 guy after last week. And I think he was a fade of mine. I think that there was, he was not a fade of mine, but I was not exactly high. I did not want to fade him, but I was low on him compared to the experts, just like I am this week compared to anybody who starts him. And I think it's proven why last week. He only got 4 receptions for not a whole lot of yards. He just got another touchdown. But touchdowns are the least reliable thing. I want to remind you of that. Nonetheless, I am fading Marvin Harrison Jr. this week. That 20% target share is not great. I was nervous about him coming into the year. As you can see, not a lot of targets. He has overproduced on the targets that he's gotten, in fact, so far on this season. So, I don't know. I don't love it. San Francisco is not a terrible matchup either for him. So, I'm not about to just tank how high I have him ranked. Definitely have him ranked ahead of some guys with some safer floors, like a guy like Jacoby Myers, who gets a lot of targets. But same with Jameson Williams here, but going up against Baltimore, if there's ever a week that Detroit's going to need some big plays to try and keep up with the team, it should be this week, right? And then Tyreek Hill, same kind of story there against Buffalo in terms of why I have them still ranked up here despite them being a little bit boom or bust type of options compared to some of these guys behind them. Might be a little bit safer. And then we get down here to Keon Coleman, who I love this week, going up against Miami. I don't really think I need to say more about why I love him. Of course, the game flow, they could move to the run, but for the most part, this isn't a team that sits there and just runs out the clock. Like, they just kind of, there'll be enough passing, and it should be productive, and at least one of these Buffalo wide receivers is going to have a big game. And if I had to bet on any of them, I would bet first and foremost on Keon Coleman. Keenan Allen, I think I'm high on. They are going up against Denver. It's a tougher matchup, but I think there's plenty of reason to think that he could have another decent week. Vegas saying that they're not the implied point total here, not too bad. And then Emeka Egbuka, just New York Jets, it's not the worst secondary in the world. We know that. Vegas is expecting him to put up quite a few points, though, and that's the upside always to Emeka Egbuka, is that touchdown upside, and this could work out similarly to last week, but the game flow is expected to be, a heavier running type of game flow, and Tampa Bay is not afraid to run the ball a lot when they have a lead. So, still a little bit concerned about him being touchdown reliant at this point in his career. He's just, he's not soaking up these 10 plus targets a game or anything like that. He did get 7 targets this week compared to the 6 last week, though, so that was good. And then we've got this little tier here. Calvin Ridley, my wide receiver 36, followed by DJ Moore, Jalen Waddle, Deebo Samuel, Michael Pittman. All of these guys, I'm positive about them generally. I want to put my argument out here for why Deebo Samuel is a fade of mine. He's really, really high up in the expert rankings right now. And I get it, because he's done really well. He's produced. He's overproduced for the amount of targets that he's had. But he's had a good amount of workload, right? But there's a reason I didn't fade Deebo Samuel last week, despite having him lower in my rankings, much like the Emeka Egbuka type thing. So he's going up against Las Vegas this week. Obviously, we think that's a nice matchup. I'm thinking that this is the breakout game for Terry McLaurin, and he's a love of mine this week, right up there. For Deebo Samuel, part of why he was so good last week against Green Bay, and it's a similar argument for against the New York Giants, is that those are really, really good pass rushing units. Las Vegas does have Max Crosby, but generally speaking, they don't have, the depth of pass rushers that the New York Giants do. They definitely don't have the same front seven that the Green Bay Packers do, and those are reasons why Washington was not able to get the ball out deep, and they were targeting their tight end, targeting Austin Eckler, targeting Deebo Samuel. But in games where they're going to be able to get the ball out to their other wide receivers, most namely get it to, of course, successfully to Terry McLaurin more, the opportunities are just going to be farther between for these guys like Deebo Samuel. And so I just don't think it's like the type of matchup that makes Deebo Samuel what he's been so far on the season. I could totally be wrong about that and eat crow, but I'm a fade him, clearly, because I have him ranked way lower than the experts. I'm sorry, Deebo. I do respect you and love you. It's nothing against you. It's just what I feels, what I thinks. That's going to bring us on to this next tier of guys who we're in this group of, like, if you got to play them, there is hope that you get a good week out of them. That includes Travis Hunter here as my wide receiver 41, just out of flex territory in a 2 wide receiver league. Flex options here essentially in a 3 wide receiver league. And we've got Cedric Tillman behind that, followed by Jerry Jeudy again. The opportunities are just there for these 3 compared to a lot of these other options so far on the season, the targets, I should say. Stephon Diggs going up against Pittsburgh. It's a decent matchup at least, so that floor is still okay for him. But, he's out there a limited amount of time, and he's, I think, limited athletically due to his injury last season. These were the concerns for him. Khalil Shakir, somebody's going to produce in this Buffalo, so I'm fine playing Khalil Shakir if I got to play Khalil Shakir this week. Quentin Johnson going up against Denver. I'm fine about him. Like I suggested, he's obviously overproduced so far, just like Emeka Egbuka. And this is what I wanted to talk about, actually, was, so look at this. Quentin Johnson, so far on the season, more consistently giving you game-winning good production from your wide receiver than Emeka Egbuka is a little bit higher in my consistency rankings so far for fantasy points. Whereas Quentin Johnson also getting more targets on average than Emeka Egbuka. By half of a target, but still getting more targets than Emeka Egbuka. Now, I do think that the matchup probably is a little bit better for Quentin Johnson this week, but you go to the expert rankings and you cannot tell me that the difference between Quentin Johnson and Emeka Egbuka based on what they've done so far this season and the opportunities that they've had so far this season is the difference between the wide receiver 21 in terms of rankings coming into the week and the wide receiver 48. Look at the quarterbacks for them. Worst case scenario, you think that these two are roughly equal quarterbacks. You look at the ecosystem, both of them are teams that are going to be passing. In fact, this week, Vegas thinks that Los Angeles Chargers are going to be more of a negative game script, but still a positive game script compared to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers against the New York Jets. More rushing potential for the Jets this week than the Los Angeles Chargers. Their rushing attack has been much more efficient than the Los Angeles Chargers rushing attack has been so far on the season. So you cannot sit there and tell me that the difference between these two should be 27-ish players. The situations, looking at it favorably, are the same for the two. And if anything, I would argue that they're actually more favorable for Quentin Johnson to be more productive in the next week and any random week going forward. Now, once again, I still think Denver's defense better than New York Jets' defense. That's part of the reason why I have the difference here between the two. I don't know. Am I out of my gorge here? Am I crazy for thinking this? Let me know. Cooper Kupp got here at wide receiver 47, followed by Rashid Shaheed in this tier. He was a love of mine last week, came through for you, but Seattle's been pretty good, and always a touchdown is not a guarantee for him, but the opportunities have been nice for him. Romeo Doubs going up against Cleveland. They've been really, really shut down against wide receivers, so I want to be higher on Romeo Doubs, but maybe the return of Cleveland's defense is back here. The return of the Mac. Josh Palmer going up against Miami. I like that. Josh Downs. Looks like he's ramping into more and more work. Tennessee's defense has been pretty good on the season so far, though. Kayshon Boutte, it's been up and downs in terms of the targets for him, but he's produced for fantasy, and Pittsburgh defense doesn't seem too scary, especially in their secondary. Troy Franklin, loved what we saw last week. We'll love to see it again. He was a love of mine last week, so let's go here against the Chargers. They've been pretty good on defense so far. Pretty good. Darnell Mooney going up against Carolina. We like that. Demario Douglas going against Pittsburgh. Once again, seems like we like that. Alec Iomanner's been very good going up against Indianapolis. I'm not totally buying into that defense being some stud defense at this point. Just not totally buying it. So Alec Iomanner, definitely an option if you need a guy to play. Sorry for not, suggest being more high on him this offseason. I think you can forgive me for that, though. Matthew Golden, Wan'Dale Robinson, Diami Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Austin. If we have to take a miracle shot on a guy, deeper league type of flex options here, hopefully that's the case. Those are my guys a little bit more than the rest of the wide receivers that I have ranked, which are just, guys that are not getting any kind of opportunities really so far in the season, or in the case of Xavier Legette, and, the opportunities that he's gotten are really, really poor. Opportunities. Trey Tucker maybe could be ranked higher in this group. I didn't really go back and touch up this group too much after my initial ranking on them. Jaden Reed, of course, going to be missing time still. I think that's it, though, for the wide receivers. So thank you very, very much for tuning on into the wide receiver video. I hope you got something out of it. Like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you agree with, what you disagree with. Love to hear your feedback. I know there are things to disagree with, but we just, that's part of the talk. And, once again, I might change some things throughout the week as I get some more data downloaded into my brain. Peace out, guys.